My guest today has a front row seat to President Trump's federal takeover of Washington, D.C. City Councilmember Brianne Nadeau represents Ward 1, a diverse stretch of the city's northwest. She's seen the impact of the takeover of the police department, the flood of ICE agents and other federal officers into the district, and the military patrolling the streets. We discuss how this moment is reshaping life in the district, the roots of the city's crime problems, and what to expect moving forward as Trump signals plans to extend this approach to other cities. All right, Councilmember Nadeau, thank you so much for taking some time to come on the pod.
Happy to be here.
I wanted to start off by giving listeners help them understand how DC government works. I don't think everybody will be as familiar. We don't have a state legislature in DC. We don't have a governor in DC. For that matter, we don't have voting senators or Congress people. We can talk about that later. But the DC City Council is kind of like the only show in town. How did that come to be? And tell us a little bit about how it works.
Sure. You're absolutely right. So the DC Council, it's 13 duly elected officials. We are the state, county, and city legislature. So one unicameral house that votes on all the laws in the District of Columbia for our 700,000 residents. We also have an elected mayor and an elected attorney general, which is a little newer. I can talk about that in a minute. And then we have every 2,000 residents represented by what are called advisory neighborhood commissioners. That's your hyper-local representative. I used to be one. It's a nonpartisan, unpaid, really thankless job, but it's like really true public service, very close to the people. I'm a ward council member, which means I represent about 85,000 people, one of 8 wards, but we also have 5 at-large members, including our chairman, who's elected by voters, not by us. And it all came about in 1973. That was our Home Rule Act, which established the District of Columbia as an independent, autonomous government. And until then, we had been ruled by commissioners appointed by the federal government who really didn't have, their fingers on the pulse of the people. And they were making decisions more as, like autocrats and, sort of with their own agendas rather than the people who elected them, because nobody here elected them.
And it's not like if you're from a big city out there, you might have a city council that's probably made up of part-time employees that do other jobs. This is not like that, right? You guys are full-time politicians.
Most of us are. So on paper, we're part-time technically, but none of us have another job that you'd consider like your full-time job. I think we've got one professor right now. We've kind of consistently had a professor or an adjunct or somebody. But yeah, most of us. Yeah, I don't have time to do another job for sure. And we're lucky that it's decently compensated. It's well compensated. You look at state legislators around the country, most of them have like a part of time legislation job where they're like in session for 3 months out of the year or 6 months out of the year. And then they have to have another job to support themselves.
So I want to spend a lot of time talking about what has happened over the past month and really what happened since the beginning of the second Trump term. But I want to kind of get into that by starting off with where we were before this takeover happened. And you've been in local government. You mentioned ANC. You started as an ANC back in the mid-aughts, right? So you've been 20 years in DC local government.
Yeah.
So the premise for what Trump says and what this whole emergency situation and sending all the feds to DC was the crime situation. If you look back at what has happened since you've been in city government, violent crime, especially homicides, kind of ebbs and flows. In the early to mid-aughts, it was pretty bad. The lowest it went was 2012. Then it spiked back up in basically COVID times. In your estimation, your experience, why do you think those ebb and flows happen?
I wish I had a good answer for you. And anyone who says that they know is not someone you should trust, because there are so many different factors that go into what is going on in the streets. Our city had a very different experience in COVID and post-COVID than every other city in the country. And I can give you a bunch of hypotheses. I'll give you a couple, but the truth is, it's poverty. It's our federal justice system. It's whoever is prosecuting the crimes in the District of Columbia, which, by the way, is a federal appointee. We don't have control over that. Sometimes it's trends. Like there are TikTok trends that drive crime in cities because young people want to be cool and emulate what they see on TikTok, right? We had the Kia challenge a few years ago where certain vehicles were easy enough to break into and hotwire, right? So like, and if that's your vehicle and you're the victim of crime, it's not funny. And if you're a young person emulating TikTok, you think you're just doing a prank, but you're actually committing a very serious crime. And so I think the stakes have become higher for young people and for our community over time. And I can say, like, when the ebbs, in terms of ebbs and flows, so when I first came on the council, it was 2015. I want to say we had a spike right around then, right around 2016. And then we did some work on prevention, on actually standing up programs that get people to put down the guns, because that's the violent crime in my mind is really the scariest part. None of it's good, but when people are shooting back and forth in neighborhoods, that's what's really scary for a lot of us. And those investments are really important. We created the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. We created violence intervention programs. Now, you see a city like Baltimore is doing really well with that because you have an executive leader, a mayor who is very into it and like really pushing on its implementation. We haven't had that in all the time the programs have existed. It's really been pushed and driven by the legislature. And that's a challenge because we're not the implementers. So, I think what has helped recently, we have a police chief who's real focused on communications and data and traditional policing and getting people out, walking the beat out of their cars, officers, but also the real-time crime center where everybody's sharing information and footage at the same time, all in one place, and you can get ahead of like a robbery spree if you start looking at the patterns quickly. You can apprehend a stolen vehicle if you're using various technology across the city. And that is the kind of stuff people should expect, but isn't something that was well utilized here until recently.
What was going on that caused crime to spike after the pandemic? If you listen to Republicans, the president, the police union, they say it's because the city council passed these laws that kind of handcuff police officers, and there was this feeling that police didn't want to do their jobs after that. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've heard that talking point too over and over and over again, and it doesn't really make a ton of sense because most of what we've done at the council is codify existing policy, and putting it into law, or doing things like, here's a good example, allowing the chief to fire police officers who've committed crimes. That's a big one, and the police union hates that. Or let's say prohibiting excessive use of force, right? These are things that are good for our community, and we don't want a police force that's only successful if they're hurting people, right? We don't want to race to the bottom with our police force. No, what we saw really was not surprising after COVID. I mean, we're going to be recovering from COVID for a long time, because people became so disconnected from the social networks and the social services. Kids weren't in school, so they didn't have access to meal programs the same way they did when school was in session. They didn't have access to after school. They didn't have access to tutoring. There weren't a lot of activities going on. Kids weren't allowed, we didn't have the rec centers open for an extended period of time. And the same is true for adults. I mean, some adults went into the office, some didn't. but the entire social fabric really fell apart. And we're still crawling back from that. I mean, kids are still struggling deeply, and so are the grown-ups. I mean, folks are isolated. There's a lot of depression, mental health concerns. I mean, it it was a global pandemic, and a lot of people like to just talk about it like, well, that's past, and we can all move on. And if you're, perhaps more privileged and your life didn't change that much, then perhaps you can. But for people who were already struggling, it just made life so much harder and so much worse. And when you have that type of situation, you always see more crime, right? There's definitely a correlation between poverty and crime and unemployment and crime and bad things happening to people and crime. So I'm not surprised by it at all, but it was upsetting and disappointing. And I think it was more of a reflection of what we did and didn't do to help people in their day-to-day lives than what was going on with public safety.
You talked about the legislation that was passed. I think there were several different bills, but the 2020 Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform bill
Yeah,
that was passed had different aspects to it, like banning neck restraints, made body camera image footage more accessible, eliminated also the union's ability to negotiate over discipline. I think this is kind of what you were talking about. But by
exactly.
2023, you do get to the lowest number of officers, I think, in the last 50 years. Do you understand why some officers, maybe on the heels of Black Lives Matter and the way police officers were being portrayed in the media and the legislation that was passed and things that were being said about them, didn't feel super jazzed up about the job and about getting out of their car and doing kind of hard police work?
Absolutely. It's a hard job. And the the vitriol that was being directed towards all police was incredibly challenging, I'm sure. And I have in Ward 1 a really great relationship with MPD. I talk to various officers every day because we're always working together on something in the community. And it's so easy to see how hardworking folks are at MPD and how much they care about the community. Um, you know, what we were doing with police reform was ensuring that the public felt they could trust the police, that when there were bad actors, there were no excuses for what would happen next, that the police chief would have the ability to root out officers that didn't have the care of the community in mind, right? As should anybody who oversees such an important agency. Because police are unlike any other government employee. They have the ability to take away somebody's liberty and in a very serious situation, someone's life. And what was going on in 2020 was that that was very clearly on display. And I stand by the changes that we made back then because they allowed us at the time to actually help build and restore some trust between the public and our police force. Unfortunately, and I know we'll get to this later, but unfortunately, under Trump too, right now, so much of that work has gone by the wayside because MPD now has federal law enforcement embedded with them, ICE embedded with them. They're working with the National Guard in our communities, and people are now afraid to call the police even when they need help because they don't know who's going to show up that might hurt them or who might hurt a member of their family.
One more question on this, and I want to move on, but I just wonder if you have, considering Trump came back into power, considering that all the blowback that came along with that, not just on DC, but across the country, the pendulum swinging from Black Lives Matter to basically the opposite, the pendulum's on the opposite side now. Do you have any regrets about how maybe you and other progressive politicians handled the policing situation and the Black Lives Matter situation back in 2020, and maybe the blowback that it led to?
Democrats are terrible at messaging. It's just a fact. We lead with our hearts, and we don't check the polls to say, oh, this message might not sound good in 5 years, or it might get used against me, or it might piss off some political opponents that will then come and try to recall me, for example, or run against me as a police officer, for example. Two true things that actually happened. But the content is solid. The reforms that we made are evergreen and are incredibly important for the stability and the future of our police force, because they become the bedrock. They become the foundation for ensuring that we have officers who meet the standards our community deserves, rather than having a race to the bottom of who can we recruit that might meet some basic criteria to be on our police force. We want people in the MPD who know they can do their job without a neck restraint, and they know they can do their job without stopping and frisking people, and they do their job through community engagement and building those relationships.
I want to get to what happened has happened in the past month or so. There's kind of several different things happening at once, but the president starts talking about DC, saying that it's a hellhole and saying all these things that are obviously not true. So, I've been just thinking about it and reflecting on what I think about DC and what I think about the things that are being said about DC. It's not a hellhole, but we have had problems. There are problems walking around the streets. We've seen all that. Where do you think we were at, like, before this takeover happened?
I thought we were in a pretty good place. So I should say before the second Trump administration began, because we've had some issues since he started, but let me talk about that. So crime in DC, 30-year low before the federal takeover. That was true. Incredible strides made since 2023, but overall, a very important milestone in that 30-year low. What else? Test scores going up in our schools, new rec centers opening every year, great community engagement going on. Anytime the White House falls into the hands of the party that is not prevailing in the District of Columbia, you see a lot of civic activism and engagement, a lot of support for people that we're worried about. And unfortunately, we were right to be worried. Right when Trump got in, he really started up with the ICE raids and the ICE patrol, so going after our immigrant neighbors. And of course, the narrative is that they're trying to arrest immigrants who are criminals, or, all kinds of things. I mean, what's happening instead is they're arresting our neighbors, our teachers' husbands, parents of our it's every day we hear more stories about people that are contributing members of our community that are being taken away without very much information about where they're being taken. So that has been really challenging. And then the federal takeover started, and it really ramped up because ICE then essentially embedded itself with MPD. So MPD's day-to-day work essentially also became immigration enforcement, because they were with them tagging along. Not to mention various federal agencies. Here's an example. This morning, the FBI was at the Columbia Heights Metro checking kids' IDs. The FBI. They stopped a 4-year-old and asked his mother where his kid's ride free card was. And of course, if you don't know, under 5, Metro is free. So you don't need a kid's ride free card anyway. Seriously, we're profiling Black 4-year-olds now. I mean, this is where we are. But it's really, as I was saying earlier, eroded the trust that we have with our local police force, because now our neighbors who, some have an uneasy relationship with the police, depending on their situation, perhaps, as a young brown person or a young Black person growing up, you didn't have a good experience with the police. That is very common. And maybe you have a more uneasy relationship with the police, but basically don't feel on edge every time you see an MPD officer. I mean, it's just that doesn't exist anymore. And everybody's angry with them. And everything is escalating because residents are so angry every time they see any sort of police action. They come out, they yell, they videotape, they're resisting. It's chaos, and it's not helpful to the community.
I've been trying to understand what exactly the takeover of MPD means. It's like they installed some administration people to come supervise, but do you have an idea of like what exactly they're doing inside MPD?
So my understanding is they're not actually inside MPD. So the president keeps saying that he federalized MPD, which means a certain thing that he's not actually doing. So the court sided with us that he does not have the authority or the power to command or control our police force. So our police force is in command and control by Police Chief Pamela Smith, who's appointed by Mayor Bowser and confirmed by the DC Council. However, under a public safety emergency that he declared, which will be over on the 9th, God willing, so in 4 days from when we're talking, he may request the services of MPD. And in this case, he and the chief and the feds have determined that even under the Sanctuary Values Act, MPD is allowed to share information about immigration status with people they've arrested or charged.
So is that the entire? Is that like the entirety of what this emergency takeover has amounted to? That
no, there's more.
I mean, sadly. I know there's a lot of other things, obviously, with the Guard and with all these other three-letter agencies and ICE and all that. But when it comes to just like his ability to kind of commandeer MPD, what else is happening that has changed the department?
So the other piece of this is that we've always had cooperation with federal law enforcement for various reasons, right? Work with the FBI and the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms Bureau, DEA, on investigating drug crimes or gun crimes, right? So they're a useful partner in that way. But until now, that's really been a behind-the-scenes kind of thing. They help with investigation. They help with people power. They help with evidence, all of that. Now, those folks are actually patrolling the streets. And the challenge is they don't know DC law. They don't know our neighborhoods. They're not used to patrolling. I mean, a lot of these are like desk officers, or they're like, special units that like do, I don't know, the stuff you see on TV. And they kind of just go wherever MPD is. So whether that's through some sort of agreement, or it's they're monitoring the radios, or, MPD sharing what their plans are for the day, I don't know exactly how that's happening day to day, but it is happening. So for example, MPD does DUI checkpoints for road safety, and they've done them for years. And they're actually rather effective. They could stop people from hurting others. They do like an interagency thing. Sometimes they also do it in collaboration with, a county to the north or whatever, and at the border. They'll give out car seats. They'll do warnings for minor infractions, but if someone has a DUI, they can, take them in, etc. So they've been doing these, and ICE is with them and asking their immigration status and yanking people out of cars. And I mean, it's happening every day, basically, not specifically the checkpoints, but something like that. And what would
I've seen a lot of the videos on social media.
Yeah, the videos are everywhere. I mean, you can't, there's not enough time in the day to see them all. And so what would be routine police work is now just escalating. Let me give you an example. One of the first nights that the federal presence happened, and it was before he had declared the emergency, but he was like, we're going to bring in some feds. There was a robbery in like North Columbia Heights area, which is on the border of my ward and Ward 4, highly, very populated area, and it's also a commercial corridor, so like restaurants, etc. And so MPD responds. Feds are monitoring the radio. So they show up. So then neighbors who see the feds show up come outside and they start protesting. Okay? Meantime, somebody on a scooter's going by, feds decide they're going to stop him and arrest him for I don't even know what. I can't even remember at this point if that was immigration or if it was something else. And then because of all the chaos that's going on right here on 14th Street, some poor schmo on a e-bike crashes into the police cruiser. I mean, all of this for the response to a routine robbery. And, we have feds harassing teens that are just trying to go into Union Station to ride the metro. I mentioned the 4-year-old being carded on the metro this morning. It's wild. I mean, every day we hear something new. Parents being abducted. We had a parent driving their kid to school last week, I think, and they pulled over the vehicle and took the parent, left the teenager there to get herself to school, I guess. And can you imagine watching your parent being taken away and not knowing where they're going or if you're going to see them again? I mean, and how much guilt you must feel. She was so upset because she felt like it was her fault because he was taking her to school. How do you get over that?
What has been the reaction? I know you represent Columbia Heights in Northwest Washington, and it's a heavily Hispanic area. What has been the reaction from that community?
People are angry. People are scared. People don't want to go to school or work. The streets are pretty empty. It's Columbia Heights is the busiest part of the whole city, basically. And we usually have street vendors who sell various goods and food, and it's been a ghost town. Restaurants, certain restaurants are, yeah, exactly, right there on 14th Street in front of Target. If that area is not without its challenges, like we're still trying to get that vending zone implemented, but we don't want people to be scared to come outside and sell mangoes, and that's how they make their living. Some businesses aren't able to open because they're either their staffers too scared or they don't want to put their staff at risk to commute.
Yeah, I've heard from some friends that own businesses there that have had the experience of ICE coming in and asking for people's paperwork.
Yeah.
There's been this notion that this will actually all end up hurting the ability to fight crime. You talked about kind of hurting the relationship between the police and the community, but also just like especially in the Latino community, like the willingness to call police and report crime if you're afraid that ICE is listening to the radios, that has to make it difficult to investigate and solve crimes in those areas, I would imagine.
1,000,000%. So even before 2020, when we passed the Sanctuary Values Act, MPD had a policy of not cooperating with ICE. And every once in a while, we would hear a story of an MPD officer who, like, oh, let me tell you about a guy you can get, to ICE. And it was very rare that was not the policy. And it's been so firm, right? Like, we don't cooperate with ICE. It's safe to call the police. This has all gone to the wayside now because they obviously are cooperating. I mean, they're literally cooperating with ICE. ICE is riding around in their vehicles with them. The immigrant community is never going to feel safe calling the police again. I mean, I don't know how long it will take, if ever, for people to trust again. Decades, generations, I don't know. And it's so harmful to the day to day because it also creates this scenario where immigrants get targeted by criminals more because they know they're so vulnerable and they're not going to call. We saw this a lot um, under Trump one, like especially folks who work in jobs where they get paid in cash. You know, folks know when payday is and when to target immigrants. It's very upsetting. Um,
Domestic violence is a big problem.
Domestic violence is a huge problem. I mean, it's when I first came into office, I remember this very clearly because the mayor and I both came in at the same time, and if I recall correctly, she had said to me, I really want to focus on domestic violence because it's one of the highest, reported. It's one of the biggest crime issues in our city, and then the rest of the crime wave started, and it just kind of fell by the wayside because we had to deal with the stuff that people can see because that's what people are so angry about. But domestic violence has always been a challenge here, and there's never enough resources to address it, let alone, you know, what'll happen if people don't feel safe calling the police.
What do you make of all these National Guard guys wandering around? I was in the wharf the other weekend, and there's just guys with long guns, groups of them everywhere.
Yeah.
It's on the mall by the Capitol. Um,
Couple things
you know,
about that. My husband's a veteran, by the way, not National Guard, Army, but, people who choose to serve in the military do so because they love our country and they love our people and they want to protect everybody. And the National Guard is not supposed to be patrolling cities, let alone cities not in their own state. And they're not supposed to be armed with M4s. So it's a very strange situation, right? So who do we call the National Guard in for? Very extreme situations, floods, hurricanes, natural disasters. Would have liked to have called them in, when the U.S. Capitol was being attacked. That would have been ideal. Ironically, that day, the mayor tried to call them in, and the Secretary of the Army, the Department of Defense, President Trump, said no. But here they are now, I guess, quote, keeping us safe. Um, it's a
doesn't seem
shame,
like
I
they're
think.
doing a whole lot other
No,
than
and,
just
and here's the
walking
thing is
around.
like when you sign up to be in the National Guard, you're making a sacrifice, but you I assume hope that it's something worthwhile. So like these are folks who've had to leave their jobs, leave their families, leave their lives to come just, I don't know, pick up trash on the National Mall. They were mulching the other day. This is stuff the National Park Service has jurisdiction over and could be doing at any time if they were adequately funded and Doge had not cut all of their positions. And by the way, we love when the National Park Service has more resources because they're everywhere in the city. And we should talk about the National Park Service police, the park police as well. But yeah, I mean, oh, and the other thing is when you are activated, you're not getting paid by your day job. So for a lot of people who have been activated to be in DC, this is a huge pay cut for them. And for it to be a huge pay cut on top of it not really being a meaningful activity that you feel really proud of doing to help your country, I can't imagine morale is great. There's been a lot of ink spilled on this over the past several days, but my takeaway is this is a waste of their time. It's a waste of a really valuable resource, and frankly, like I can't imagine it's going to help with recruitment for any of these federal entities either. You can,
Guess it depends
join
on
the
what
National
you
Guard.
want to do.
Yeah, you get to go mulch the nation's capital. Join up.
All that being said, is it working what Trump is doing? I mean, crime is down, right? And I don't know. I think sometimes I do feel a little bit safer, and I recognize I'm coming at this from a position of privilege, and my perspective is not the same as everybody's, but does feel a little bit safer when there are members of National Guard on the street corner.
That's interesting. I don't feel safer. Most people I know don't feel safer because they're on the street corner. Um, and
Well,
not
nobody's going
least
to
of which
commit a
is,
murder or a carjacking with a guy with an M4 standing on the other side of the street.
to be honest with you, I don't know that's true. because the people who are committing murder and carjacking are not using a lot of logic. Right. So we've always known that when it comes to ending violent crime, it's not about putting a bunch of cops on the street. It's about mitigating conflict, creating ceasefires, getting people to put down the guns. Because if you're mad at somebody and you have a firearm, you're gonna act in the heat of the moment. You're not going to be thinking, oh, there's like 6 cops right there. I'm going to shoot this guy and then totally get caught and go to jail for the rest of my life. That's not how it works. No, the reason crime is down even further is because nobody's coming out. I mean, you don't have any of the life of the District of Columbia. And I know that sounds funny because the life isn't crime, but you don't have people going to restaurants, you don't have people leaving their houses. It's like a ghost town. And crime was already going down. I mean, we always have more work to do. There's always more we can do. But the work that the chief was doing and the community-based work was actually finally coming together, and that 30-year low. And, we are now in a military occupation, and there are a lot of countries that actually act like that, right? When you have a militarized government. So you tend to have low crime rates in places that have dictatorships and militarized government. And it's because people are too afraid to do anything, let alone commit a crime. And that is not the country we want. It's not the city we want.
Is there any argument to be made that these actions by Trump could kind of like shake up the city and say, we don't have to live like this in certain respects? I mean, and that maybe we need like radical action to not live with kind of the street crime and the quality of life issues that we often live with here?
No. I mean, I haven't heard from anybody who's like, we love this. This is the best. Nobody wants crime. Like, nobody wants crime. But also, nobody wants this. Nobody wants a military occupation in our neighborhoods. And nobody wants our neighbors to be snatched up without due process. We have people being arrested for being homeless. I mean, how is that helping us be safer?
What do you make of the predicament that Mayor Bowser finds herself in?
Well, I'm glad I'm not the mayor. It's not the job that I ran for, and I'm glad for it, but it's challenging. It's challenging to lead a city always. I know she's really trying to have a good relationship with President Trump. That is a smart thing to do. But it's always been my opinion that he and his advisors have a certain plan, and they are going to execute that plan, whether we make it easy for them or make it hard for them. And I sure as hell would rather fight back and make it hard for them.
Plan meaning what? A complete federal takeover of the city?
Yeah. I mean, well, the country, right? I mean, they have, Project 2025 is a lengthy document. But I mean, look, what they're doing here is a test case. It's easier to do it here in the District of Columbia because we don't have full autonomy. But he's already talked about wanting to go to Chicago and Boston and Baltimore and Portland. And I think that he's going to, right? I mean, he's trying this out, and he's going to tweak it and make it better and stronger in the next city. And he doesn't really care if he's breaking the law. I mean, here's the other thing. They've been touting all the arrests that they're making, but the courts have been throwing these out because they're so egregious. I mean, some of them violate civil rights. Some of them are trumped up charges. I mean, the courts are livid about the kind of cases that are coming to them. Sometimes the grand jury won't even indict on the cases that they're sending. It's a lot of theater is what it is. So they may be locking people up and keeping them in jail longer than they should be all on things that nobody was ever going to convict them on, which is another waste of resources and tying up our court system, which already has enough trouble because the Senate won't confirm all of our judges. So there's a lot that the federal government could be doing to help us. And instead, they're just implementing this fever dream of President Trump to be a dictator.
Bowser publicly credited the president's efforts with decreasing crime, and Trump has at times said things about Bowser. Do you think that makes her politically vulnerable? I mean, in a city that voted for Kamala Harris like 90%, is that going to come back to bite her?
I think residents are feeling betrayed by that, very angry and saddened, and that will absolutely create political challenges.
What, considering what's at stake, and you mentioned earlier that it's a difficult position that she's in, what do you think the posture from the mayor should be?
I mean, again, I'm not the executive. I'm one of 13 legislators, but my position has always been we have to fight back. We cannot give in before we've tried everything we possibly can, and then maybe not even then. And you see, for example, our attorney general is fighting. He fought back against the control of the police force and won. Now he's fighting back about the presence of the National Guard, and I truly hope he'll prevail there. And hopefully he will continue fighting each of these grievances, because this is just a wild abuse of power, an incredible interference in the day-to-day operations of our city, and it makes people scared and upset and angry, and it makes them unsafe, because you may be targeted for the color of your skin by these federal agents, or by something you do in public that really is, just a normal behavior. They are out of control. They are targeting our residents gleefully.
This kind of dynamic that the mayor is going through is played out in other aspects of life too. It seems like what has happened with universities and other states and politicians, Democrats are trying to figure out if the posture is to fight or play possum, or maybe pay a small price and stay out of the line of fire. I guess it sounds like your stance is like it's better to stand and fight now.
Yeah, because if you give up now, what do we have left? We're more vulnerable than all the other cities. So if he takes these fights to other cities, then those governors will come after him, because he can't command their police force and he can't force them to cooperate. And the idea of a governor sending their National Guard to another state, I truly hope that is a line in the sand that one governor would not do to another. But nobody cares about the District of Columbia in this scenario, right? We're 700,000 people who've never had a voting senator or member of Congress. We don't have any political power at the federal level. We are constantly fighting for the limited autonomy that we have. And so we're an easy mark. And there's no doubt why he chose us. But if he keeps going, he will get the resistance that he deserves in those cities.
On the lack of representation issue, it seems like there's no hope for DC statehood. Would it be smarter to lobby Virginia or Maryland to take DC residents in so that there is at least some hope of elected representation?
Yeah, I think we'll get there eventually. I mean, it's possible that this insane exercise will actually be a turning point, because all it actually takes for DC to become a state is a bill that goes through the House and the Senate. Our bill's gone through the House multiple times. It always gets stuck in the Senate. I hope
Republicans are
there's a
going to never vote for that, though.
no. I mean, well, and what's wild about that is that it used to be a very bipartisan issue because it was just about representation, right? But I think this country will have a reckoning. I mean, we can't go through a second Trump administration and have as many people hurting, as many benefits taken away all across this country and not have some sort of political reckoning. So, you know, we can't we can't give up on statehood, but that's not what we're talking about today. Like right now we're fighting for our lives, we're fighting for our autonomy, but when we come out on the other side of this, we're going to go back to that fight.
What do you think about Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton? She's saying that she's going to be running again next year. She's 88 years old. Some colleagues have expressed concern that she's shown signs of cognitive decline. Is she being helpful in this current situation?
You know what? She's been a tremendous leader and our warrior on the Hill for decades, and we truly owe her a debt of gratitude. I mean, just a tremendous leader. I suspect she won't run again, and we'll pass the torch to the next generation. I think there's a lot of that going on in the House and the Senate and other levels of government now, and I'm confident that when she does that, somebody will step up to really carry us forward with that mission. But in the meantime, she and her staff, they continue to fight for us.
You suspect that she won't? Would you call on her not to? Would you advise her not to? Would you prefer somebody else?
It's a really personal decision. I'm not in her inner circle. But I know that she's got a lot of smart people advising her and who all want the best for her and the District of Columbia.
The $1 billion of funding that Congress withheld from the district, can you explain how that happened and what the impact was?
Yes. So the District of Columbia has I want to say $13 billion budget annually, most of which is locally raised dollars. We have our own taxation system and our own, budgeting process, and we've had a balanced budget for, I'm going to say 20 years, and which one cannot say about Congress. And we have budget autonomy, but there is this arcane part of the congressional budgeting process that can impact our budget. And that's what happened this year. When they don't pass a budget and they go with instead what's called a continuing resolution, there's a clause in there that says, but the DC government can operate on, under the budget that they have duly passed. Basically, the Republicans took that out. They left it out, I think on purpose, although some have said it was an accident that they just really enjoyed a lot once they realized they'd made it, which instead of allowing us to spend our FY25 dollars at the levels we had budgeted, we had to go back to FY24 levels because that's what Congress was doing with their budget, right? They were staying at last year's budget, which in our case meant we weren't allowed to spend $1.1 billion that had been budgeted that we had in the bank. It wasn't federal dollars. It wasn't like, Doge trying to save money by not sending an allocation to DC. It's all our money. It is sitting in our bank account and we are not allowed to touch it until October 1st. So for a government that says, that they don't think we are good enough at running our own government, it sure doesn't help when they cut $1 billion, right? It's hard for us to fully run our police force or our schools or our public works operations. Like, the president wants the city to be clean. Well, I mean, we need enough money to run those trash trucks and the sweeping teams, et cetera. So it's had a huge impact. Contract freezes, hiring freezes, all kinds of impact on the workforce and on the city.
Just a couple more questions I have. Wanted to ask, what do you think is going to happen over the next weeks and months with the federal involvement in DC? Do you envision them, after this 30-day deadline is up, them kind of packing up and moving out and kind of slowly dissipating? Or will they ratchet up and this will become more intense?
It's a great question. So, the emergency allows the president to request the services of MPD. It actually doesn't impact the presence of his own people. So he can have his federal law enforcement people wandering around if he wants to. He's extending the National Guard, I think, until I don't know, something like November. It's October, November. It's hard to keep track because things keep changing. But it's entirely possible, they could remain. And we have a lawsuit filed to get them out of here. But it seems like that's what he wants to do. And Georgia's sending several hundred troops now. So they're coming from all around the country now.
Last question is a little bit in a different direction. I wanted to ask you about the commanders coming back to the district possibly. Do you support that? Do you think they should come back? And do you think the president is going to muck around with it if they don't change their name back to the Redskins?
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. So there's legislation before the council right now to put $1 billion+ into the renovation of the stadium for the Commanders to return to the District of Columbia. I don't support public investments in football stadiums, and I also don't think it's a great use of land in that area. This is the first time we've had total control of that land, and to just default to the prior use to me is sort of a lack of imagination. It could be a lot of different things now that we actually have the power over it. So I have not been supportive of the team returning, not because I don't love the team. They're great. But I think there are a lot of other ways we could use that land.
Is it going to happen despite your opposition? It seems like it's kind of a done deal.
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, it gets 2 votes. It already passed on the first vote. So I think something very strange would have to happen if it didn't pass on the second reading in September 17th.
But on the name thing, the president seems pretty dead set on this name change happening back. My take is that would really hurt ticket sales if the team acquiesced to the president in D.C. for this new stadium, if it's ever built.
Yeah, I'm not sure what leverage he has there. I'm sure he'll find some, but there's going to be a lot of water under the bridge by the time we get to that point, so we'll see.
That's true. But that's all the questions that I have. I really appreciate the time. I thought it was an interesting conversation and just a lot happening in the district, so I appreciate you taking some time to speak with me.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to ask all these great questions.